A village is being attacked by a monster called Yoma, beings that feed on human flesh and blood and can shapeshift into human form. With the casualties rising, the village leader decides to call for help in the form of a claymore, a half-human, half-Yoma hybrid warrior. When the claymore arrives, she finds the only person unafraid of her to be a young boy called Raki, who spends the day with her. He returns home to find that his brother Zaki was the Yoma. As he is about to be killed, the claymore enters and manages to kill the Yoma. Raki follows the claymore to the desert but falls unconscious. When he wakes, he discovers the claymore had left him in an inn and he quickly goes to find her. He meets another claymore in the woods who turns out to be another Yoma that captures him. The claymore shows up and again dispatches the Yoma and saves Raki. He decides to follow her on her journey and discovers that her name is Claire. Claire is seen killing a small number of Yoma in a town, accompanied by Raki. Later that night, Claire wanders off telling Raki she needs the toilet and he shouldn't follow her. In the woods, she meets her handler Rubel, a member of the organization that is in charge of controlling and giving missions to Claire. He gives her new clothes and a black card. Claire opens it and is shocked by the symbol inside. She heads back to Raki and tells him they are setting off for somewhere new the next day. Claire leaves Raki at an inn in the town while going on the mission, but Rubel appears before Raki. He tells him that claymores can lose their human side and turn into Yoma, and once this occurs, they then have to be killed. Raki panics and chases after Claire. She reveals to Raki they are there to kill a claymore who is passing her Yoki limit and has nearly awakened. Claire explains they were friends and used to comfort each other when they were being transformed into claymores. The claymore appears and has an emotional talk with Claire, who reveals the claymore's name to be Alina. Claire then cuts her friend in two, as Alina apologizes and thanks her for killing her before she awakens. Afterwards, Alina's claymore is put into the ground to mark her grave. After Alina's death, Rubel sends Claire to Rabona on her next job. However, Rabona does not allow any unnatural creatures to enter, including claymores, so Claire has to use a Yoki-suppressing pill in order to keep her identity a secret. Unfortunately, this makes her lose the ability to sense the Yoma and she'll have to search the hard way. She and Raki enter the holy city under the guise of a brother and sister looking to sell some items. They head to the church and meet with the Father Vincent, the man who sent for the claymore's help. Later that night, Claire meets with him again and after getting little information, asks him to take care of Raki if she dies. She leaves but is ambushed by Galk and Sid, two guards who suspect her of being a claymore. The next morning, the soldiers enter Claire at Raki's room and accuse Claire of being a claymore. They see Claire's eyes are brown, not silver, but still suspect her. But Raki manages to convince them she is just a normal girl. She again meets with Father Vincent and tells him she believes the Yoma is a voracious eater and that she will hunt for it again at night. When night falls, Claire leaves in search of the Yoma but is once again attacked by Galk and Sid. After a brief skirmish, they hear a scream from the cathedral. Claire heads there, but she is unable to sense the Yoma and is attacked. Galk and Sid try to help but have to be saved by Claire. During the battle, she is impaled by the Yoma's extendable nails. The Yoma drops the badly injured Claire and turns his attention to Galk and Sid. Suddenly, a large number of soldiers enter the cathedral, and the Yoma quickly makes its escape. Galk picks up Claire despite Sid's protests, saying they have to repay her for saving their life. Raki arrives at the cathedral and runs to the severely injured Claire, who's being looked after by Father Vincent. Claire later wakes up and continues her search for the Yoma by checking all the priests in the cathedral, but she cannot find Yoma amongst them. She wonders where it could hide and then realizes it has hidden itself amongst the church's tombs. Raki is seen walking through the cathedral's tombs when he is attacked by a corpse in one of the coffins. Claire arrives and saves him before engaging the Yoma in battle along with Galk and Sid. Claire slices off one of the Yoma's arms, but she soon has to stop as she is approaching her limit. The Yoma attacks Claire in her defenseless state, but she is saved by Galk and Sid. This gives her an opening to slice off the Yoma's other arm before slicing it in half. However, Claire is past her limits and is beginning to awaken. She tries to behead herself with her own sword, but Raki grabs her and expressing his desire to remain with Claire, helping to stop the awakening process. Later, Claire and Raki leave the city for their next job. In the old days, a long-haired claymore is seen killing Yoma in a village and leaves before meeting up with an organization member named Orsay. He gives her next target after introducing her as claymore number 1, Teresa. Teresa enters another village and begins to slay all the Yoma until only one remains. The final Yoma and human guise hides behind a young girl, but Teresa effortlessly kills him as well. The next day, Teresa attempts to leave the village but is stopped by the little girl. Teresa tells the girl that she is not her savior and kicks her away several times before heading into the forest. The girl enters the forest behind Teresa and continues to follow her. Teresa commends the girl for keeping up with her but says she doesn't like to be followed. However, the two are suddenly attacked by bandits. When one touches the girl, Teresa accidentally slices his hand off thinking he was a Yoma. but she realizes they want to have fun with her. She reveals her body and taunts them, asking if there are any takers. Disgusted by what they see, the men quit the leave. The girl continues to follow Teresa despite her best efforts to lose her. When the girl is injured, Teresa decides to take care of her until they reach the next village. She gives her a bath and some of her food in the meantime, but as Teresa watches the girl sleep, she realizes how strong the little girl is. The next morning, Teresa has a hard time calling the girl over by simply shouting "hey," so she decides she should name the girl. Eventually, she chooses to name her Claire. Teresa informs Claire that she will be leaving her at the next village, and Claire begins to cry, but Teresa sticks to her decision. Teresa goes for a walk when Claire falls asleep that night, but she runs into the bandit whose hand she chopped off previously. He again tries to have some fun with her, but Claire hits him over the head with a branch. He throws Claire to the ground and starts beating her, but Teresa uses his own short sword to warn him to back off. He reminds her that she is forbidden by the organization to kill humans, but she tells him it is up to her if she wants to follow the rules, and the bandit flees in fear. Afterwards, Claire hugs Teresa and asks if she is okay. This causes Teresa to cry and hug her back. At the next town, Teresa buys Claire a new outfit and then slays the Yoma that was living there. She asked someone to look after Claire, and despite Claire's protests, a kind woman volunteers to look after her. Teresa leaves the village but notices bandits heading towards the town. Realizing that the Yoma was keeping the bandits away from the town, she heads back to find Claire. Teresa reaches the town only to find it in ruins, and the one-armed bandit holding Claire. He taunts Teresa, saying he'll take good care of Claire before knocking the girl unconscious. Teresa flies into a rage and kills all the bandits single-handedly. Teresa is later surrounded by 5 claymores, and Orsay takes Claire. The claymores attempt to execute Teresa, but she easily defeats the 5 of them, but leaves them alive. Claire runs to her and Orsay asks what's going on. Teresa declares that she's found a meaning for her existence. She will live on for Claire's sake. Orsay warns her she'll regret it, but she leaves anyway. Orsay orders claymores numbers 2 to 5 be dispatched to execute Teresa. 2 claymores are seen in a village battling a large amount of Yoma, named Sophia and Noel. They argue over who has killed the most Yoma. They also debate over who is ranked number 3. Another claymore, Irene, appears and stops their argument. Sophia and Noel ask why they have been brought together, knowing any one of them could have dealt with the Yoma, and Irene tells them numbers 2 to 5 have been ordered to execute Teresa. She says she has been demoted from number 2 to number 3, and that a fairly new claymore is number 2. Just then, Priscilla arrives, apologizing for being late, and she is then introduced as the new number 2. Teresa and Claire are staying in an inn after slaying a Yoma in the same village. Claire falls asleep on Teresa's lap, but the peace doesn't last long as Teresa senses 3 claymores entering the village. Irene finds Teresa's room and starts attacking the ladder after a short conversation. Sophia attacks from the floorboards below, then Noel tries to attack from the window, but Teresa grabs Claire and leaps out and onto the street below. Outside, she is attacked by Priscilla and is barely able to defend, shocked that she never felt Priscilla's yoki. They battle, but Teresa begins to gain the upper hand. Irene, Sophia, and Noel interrupt and surround Teresa, believing they can win if it's 4-on-1. Priscilla apologizes to Teresa for not fighting 1-on-1 and releases her yoki. Teresa fights off the 4 claymores easily, disabling Irene before defeating the other 3. Irene grows frustrated, irritated that while they had been using their yoki, Teresa had not released any of hers. Teresa steps up behind Priscilla, raising her sword to behead her. Priscilla begins to cry and begs for someone to save her, then Teresa sheathes her sword, saying that Claire had made her soft. Teresa takes Claire and the 2 leave the village. Irene goes to help Priscilla, but the latter releases all of her yoki and heads after Teresa in a rage. Irene panics and orders Sophia and Noel to follow her. When confronted, Teresa warns Priscilla to leave, but the enraged warrior ignores her and attacks. Priscilla is now powerful enough to fight Teresa, which forced Teresa to release 10% of her yoki. The other 3 claymores arrive in time to see Priscilla being overwhelmed by Teresa. Irene then realizes that the extent of Teresa's power is much greater than anyone thought. Then Priscilla realizes she has gone past her limit and begs Teresa to help her return to being human. Teresa says the only thing she can do now is kill her, and Priscilla agrees. Teresa goes to behead Priscilla, but the Elmer warrior is able to cut off Teresa's hands before quickly decapitating her. Priscilla proceeds to fully awaken and then kills Sophia and Noel after they try to stop her. She then chops Irene's arm off and delivers a deep wound to her chest before flying away. Crying, Claire walks forward and embraces Teresa's head. At present, 3 new claymores, Miria, Queenie, and an unnamed claymore arrive at the town, only to find that Claire has already taken care of the other 4 that they were sent to kill. Although she was successful, Claire's orders were to await backup because of the possibility of voracious eater among the Yoma, so she ends up being scolded and reported to the organization for her independent action. Claire's handler reveals the true nature of the voracious eaters to Claire, and he also explains that what she fought in the cathedral earlier was a normal Yoma, just slightly stronger. Voracious eater is the term that the organization uses to refer to awakened beings like Priscilla. He then tells Claire to give up chasing Priscilla, as she is among the strongest of the awakened beings, but since Claire is so eager to test her limits, he puts her on a team assigned to hunt down an awakened being. Claire is the last member of the team to arrive, and to judge their strength, they all reveal their rank and experience. Number 6. Miria. 6 previous encounters with awakened beings. Number 15. Denev. 2 previous encounters with awakened beings. Number 22. Helen. No previous encounters. Number 47. Claire. No previous encounters. Hearing Claire's rank, the others are shocked, and Helen even starts to make fun of her. When Raki stands up for Claire, Helen explains to him that claymores are scattered around the continent, divided 1 per region and distinguished by rank. There are 47 regions on their continent, in other words, Claire is the weakest claymore. The cutoff rank for hunting awakened beings is usually in the 30s, so the rest of the team's quite surprised when they hear Claire's rank. Despite Helen's objections, though, Miria accepts it, as it is a decision made by the organization. After walking for a day, the team sets up camp. Miria asks Claire to battle her in order to judge her strength. Miria explains that when she saw Claire, she felt as if she was standing in the presence of an immense power. The Max suggests otherwise, though, as Claire is completely overpowered and ends up passing out from fatigue afterwards. The next evening, the team draws close to the town as they are approached by a man claiming to be sent to take them to the site. However, Miria senses his Yoki and attacks, as the man in front of them is the awakened being that they have been sent to take care of. But their information was way off. Before them stands a male awakened being, one which they have little chance of defeating given the strength of their current team. A claymore named Galadia gets summoned by a black-robed man named Ermita, who tells her to direct her senses at the mountain range beyond. There she senses the Yoki of the 4 claymores confronting a male awakened being. The awakened one begins the battle by ripping off Denev's arm and tossing her into a chasm. Helen and Claire begin fighting the awakened one, but Claire gets smashed against the cliff. Helen then releases her Yoki, cutting off some of the creature's arms. However, the awakened being quickly reattaches his arms and attacks again. Helen is saved when Denev reemerges from the chasm and attacks the awakened being. Claire rises from the rubble, and Helen tells her to pull back as she values her life, claiming Claire has no business in this fight. Helen becomes curious as to how there is a male awakened being when all the claymores are female. As they fight, Miria explains to her comrades that in the past, the organization had created male hybrids as well, and although they were great fighters, they didn't hesitate to release their Yoki, which made them more readily awaken. Miria tells the others that that's the reason only female claymores are created now. However, the awakened one interrupts her, telling her that she's missing some information, and swiftly stabs Denev and Claire before slashing Helen in the back, defeating all 3. Meanwhile, Raki looks toward the mountains, thinking about Claire, and the innkeeper asks about her. He replies that she's gone to the mountains for some business, and the innkeeper expresses worry, saying that previously, a number of claymores went to the mountains but never came back. Miria grabs Denev's body and speeds off away from the awakened one. He tries to stab her, but she speeds off to retrieve the bodies of Helen and Claire. He realizes that she releases 30% of her Yoki to engage him in battle, but she manages to hurt him. He eventually pins her down and begins maiming and torturing her. Helen tries to get up, but she can't. Suddenly, Claire gets up and tells Helen that the battle is not over. As she approaches the awakened one, he tries to strike her but misses. He then tries to strike her repeatedly, but fails again. Miria, watching, realizes Claire can sense his flow of Yoki and is actually dodging his blows by predicting them. Then Claire attacks and chops off his limbs and lands on his back. She attempts to deliver the finishing blow to his neck, but is thwarted by his neck armor. He strikes her down, but Miria has recovered enough to stand. Claire warns her that the attack is coming from below, and both claymores evade his sneak attack. With Miria's super speed and Claire's ability to sense his Yoki, their abilities correspond and they attack and finish off the awakened being. As the 4 claymores recover from their injuries, Miria suggests that the organization has purposely sent them on a suicide mission, since she discovers that they are all troublemakers who may have partially awakened. Denev proves this theory on the spot by intentionally exceeding her limits in order to heal her wounds. To the claymore's surprise, she does not awaken from the process and her wounds are fully healed. Afterwards, Miria recommends the group keep quiet and try to eliminate their status as troublemakers. Then she warns the group to avoid top 5 claymores: Alicia, Beth, Deladia, Ophelia, and Refala. She advises the group to avoid fighting them at all costs, since a battle against even one of them would only lead to disaster. Claire is sent to engage another awakened being with another team. However, much to Claire's surprise, the team only consists of herself and Claymore unknown to her. Suddenly, the Claymore grabs Claire from behind, telling her she was having a familiar scent. She stabs Claire to taste of her blood, which reminds her of the blood of an awakened being. Soon afterwards, Raki arrives and attacks the Claymore with his sword, telling her to stay back from Claire. That's the moment when Claire realizes that the warrior is the number 4 of the organization, Ophelia. Ophelia then cuts Claire's legs off and introduces a game. Claire has to reattach her legs while Ophelia and Raki fight each other. Ophelia will begin at Raki's level, but each minute she will increase her speed and strength. If Claire doesn't hurry, Raki will be killed. Raki and Ophelia engage in combat while Claire tries to desperately attach her limbs again. Raki gets badly cut but continues to fight back, and Ophelia claims that she is impressed by Raki and Claire and their determination to win. The awakened being they were supposed to hunt arrives at the scene, masquerading as a young girl, ending Ophelia's fun. She then changes into her awakened form and destroys the town. Claire manages to save Raki. However, Ophelia also survives the attack. She realizes that Claire's legs aren't completely healed and offers her to protect Raki while she completes the regeneration. Claire believes her and tries to heal herself, only to see Ophelia throws Raki into the arms of the awakened being, far out of her reach. After being pinned and taunted, Claire angrily releases her yoki and manages to free herself from Ophelia's grip. She charges towards the awakened being and saves Raki successfully. However, in doing so, she reveals her half-awakened status to Ophelia, who now truly wishes to hunt her down. Claire then tells Raki to hold on to her, and they escape. Ophelia wants to go after them but is quickly hindered by the awakened being, who wants to get rid of Ophelia first, and they engage in a fight. Meanwhile, Claire tries to get away as far as possible, knowing that the fight won't take too long. Stopping in the forest, Claire tells Raki to leave her, since Ophelia would only go after her. Raki refuses, saying that he wants to stay at her side, but Claire kisses him and promises that they will meet again. Tearfully, Raki takes Claire's words to heart and flees into the forest. Claire is seen running away from Ophelia. However, the latter soon catches up with her. Ophelia attacks and wounds her easily, even though Claire can predict her movements. Ophelia shows Claire her rippling sword, which is performed by vibrating the sword arm at high speed, causing the blade to appear as if it's rippling of a snake. In the ensuing struggle, Claire loses her right arm and falls from a cliff, but she did it on purpose to fake her death and let Ophelia think she dealt the finishing blow. Unfortunately, Ophelia sees through Claire's trick at the last moment. Out of desperation, Claire starts attacking Ophelia but doesn't land not even a single hit. In the end, even her remaining left hand is cut off and she can't defend herself any longer. As Ophelia is about to perform the finishing blow, a stranger appears, saying that she sensed a familiar presence. Ophelia is annoyed by the random wanderer and carelessly attacks, not knowing that the stranger was no other than the former number 3 of the organization, Quicksword Irene. In mere seconds, Ophelia is quickly overwhelmed and incapacitated by Irene's high-speed sword attack. When Claire wakes up, she finds herself lying on a bed in a cottage with her left hand attached again. Irene appears and tells her that she had reattached her hand right before she passed out. Irene then gives her food and tells her to recover, but also mentions that Ophelia is not dead yet. Claire and Irene talk about Teresa, and Claire reveals her reason why she joined the organization. In the night, Ophelia is seen crawling on the ground, still heavily injured by Irene and crying for her brother to save her. She starts releasing her yoki and rage and to survive from her wounds, which eventually leads to her awakening. The next day, Irene trains Claire using the quicksword. However, Irene realizes that Claire will never master the quicksword and cuts off her arm to give it to Claire. Claire hesitates but accepts the parting gift, knowing she requires its strength. Shortly after Claire leaves Irene's dwelling, the latter is confronted by Rafaela. Elsewhere, aided by addition of Irene's right arm and the newly acquired quicksword technique, Claire fights Ophelia, who has awakened. During the battle, Ophelia finally realizes that she has awakened after seeing an image of herself in the reflection of the lake. She becomes paralyzed with shock, allowing Claire to free herself and deal some damage. Unfortunately, she does not have full control over Irene's arm and cannot finish the awakened being. Ophelia then offers a new game. Claire has to cut through her body and reach until the end, without losing control over the arm and awakening. The game starts and Claire cuts her way through Ophelia's awakened body. Ophelia remarks that she hates people like Claire who wait and risk their lives carelessly, knowing they won't stand a chance. Much for her annoyance, she pierces Claire, who has to stop halfway. Ophelia shouts at her and reminds her of the people she will leave behind as she dies. Partially thanks to encouragement from the vestige of Ophelia's humanity, Claire manages to cut through her whole body. Ophelia then allows Claire to kill her. Unable to contact Claire for 3 months after Ophelia's awakening and death, the organization decides to send Galatea to track her down. In the meantime, Claire searches for Raki, disguised and with her Yoki suppressed in a local town. She nearly runs into a party of claymores on a hunt for an awakened being. The next day, Claire continues her search for Raki and meets a pair of siblings. The girl tells her about a boy, Raki, who is looking for her. Soon, a severely injured claymore limps into the town and tells Claire that the group was captured. She sets off to rescue them as, unbeknownst to her at this point, they are being tortured into awakening. Claire arrives at a cave inhabited by two awakened beings, the abyssal one known as Rifle of the West and her lover and protector Dolph. In her confrontation with Dolph, Claire is rescued by Galadia. While trying to fight Dolph again, Claire surpasses her limit and nearly awakens, but she is pulled back at last, second by Galadia's Yoki synchronization technique. They then come to learn of a secret arms race between the three abyssal ones of the North, West, and South, and Rifle's intentions to raise as many awakened troops to join her side before their inevitable confrontation. As Galadia buys time by distracting Dolph, Claire races to save Jean, the only claymore capable of penetrating Dolph's heavy armor with her special drill sword technique. When Claire finds Jean, that number 9's body is already completely awakened. But, miraculously, her mind is still human. Jean begs Claire to kill her as long as she's still human so that she could die as a human. Claire, however, tries the same method that Galadia did to her to bring back Jean. Fortunately, she succeeds and Jean's body turns back into its human form. After allowing Jean a bit of time to recover, the two claymores join Galadia and the fight with Dolph continues. When things seem to be at their bleakest, Claire finally learns how to fully control the quicksword, and this allows Jean to use her drill sword to penetrate through Dolph's armor. When they almost kill Dolph, Rifle interferes, saying that for better or worse, he is her man, and as she can't let them kill him. After Claire cuts the Abyssal One with her sword, Rifle reveals the name of the Abyssal of the North and his location. Afterwards, she disappears, leaving Galadia, Claire, and Jean behind. Galadia then asks Claire to follow her back to the organization, but the latter refuses and Jean stands to protect her. In the end, Galadia decides to spare Claire and Jean and leaves. After Galadia leaves, Claire also proceeds on her journey, followed by Jean, who owes her after she was saved. In a forest, Rubel and Rafaela confront Claire and Jean, and Rubel gives Claire the mission to go to the Northern Lands along with 23 other claymores to hunt various awakened beings that gathered there. He also mentions that Raki has gone there, giving Claire even more incentive to go. Of course, Jean insists and is sent along as well. Once there, Claire is reunited with Miria, Helen, and Denev. The 24 gathered claymores divide into 5 teams led by Flora, Undyne, Veronica, Jean, and Miria. Later that night, Claire meets up with the rest of the hunting party in a nearby cave to discuss what has happened since their last meeting. However, Jean appears and is initially unwelcome, mostly by Helen, but is allowed into the group because of her half-awakened status, which was the secret that Mira, Denev, Helen, and Claire are keeping. Claire then tells Miria, Denev, and Helen about her encounter with Rifle, but then asked about the Northern mission's chances of success. Miria replies that the chances of success are 0 because the Abyssal One of the North, Eiley, is the leader behind the gathered awakened beings. The entire mission is simply a gambit to buy time for the organization to come up with a much more foolproof plan to defend themselves. Unfortunately, while all the claymores are resting, 3 awakened being scouts attack the town. They manage to kill several civilians before the warriors can regroup themselves. Jean's team attacks the blindfolded awakened being while Flora's team is sent after the hooded awakened being. Charging in quickly, Flora tries to kill the hooded awakened being with her wind cutter, but he alters her attack using Yoki synchronization and then takes control of Carla. Claire, however, unleashes her quicksword and forces the creature to shed its human disguise. However, things are not going so well for Jean, whose team is already down. Due to the circumstances, Veronica's team appears to aid Jean, while Undyne's team goes to aid Flora's. What remains of Undyne and Flora's teams attack the turtle-like awakened being, but Undyne soon tries to attack alone. At first, the creature's Yoki synchronization technique cannot take control of her because of her great strength, but he soon causes her to lose control by causing her aura to surge. Claire and Denev barely manage to save her and continue the attack, but they are caught up in a technique in her place. However, to counter it, the two intentionally unleash their Yoki and surpass their limits. Meanwhile, Jean and Veronica's teams are still fighting the other awakened being. Howland, Veronica, and Cynthia try to weaken him in order to buy time for Jean to prepare her drill sword, but they are wounded. Eventually, however, Jean is ready, and while Helen stops the awakened being's movements with her extendable arms, the number 9 destroys his limbs with her technique. Cynthia and Veronica then finish him off. Because they intentionally surpassing their limits, Claire and Denev do not awaken, shocking the awakened being before them. They then resume their attack, with Denev eventually hacking partway through the monster's neck, but she is not strong enough to finish him. Undyne appears and assists with her strength, and the two decapitate the awakened being. Before dying, the creature takes control of two weaker warriors and tries to make them kill each other, but Claire and Flora end him once and for all with the quick sword and wind cutter techniques. The 5 teams defeat the 3 awakened beings. Some of them suffer serious wounds, but there are no casualties. In another area, Raki is shown wandering in the ruins of a town already destroyed by Yoma. There he meets a young girl who is later revealed as Priscilla. Priscilla takes a sudden liking to him, and Eiley, Priscilla's caretaker, invites Raki to accompany him, who remains determined to protect Claire, persuades Eiley to teach him swordsmanship. Meanwhile, Priscilla continues to express a seemingly innocent and peaceful liking for Raki. While with the two, Raki learns more about claymores and discovers the warrior's presence in Pieta. In town, Deneuve confronts her captain, Undyne, about her reckless approach to combat after the latter leaves their team in a fit of anger. The two eventually reconcile by revealing their motivations for becoming claymores. Meanwhile, Flora, Claire's captain, distrusts Claire because of her borrowed arm and challenges her, wondering how her wind cutter would match up against the quicksword. However, before the two can fight, Jean interferes. Claire reveals that Isla lent her the arm after Claire had lost her right arm in battle. She also reveals that she's after the awakened Priscilla, and these revelations gain Flora's support and trust. Meanwhile, Eiley meets his lieutenant, Ricardo, at nearby lake and orders him to bring along the full manpower of his awakened followers to annihilate Pieta. Eiley and Priscilla head towards Pieta, while the claymores prepare themselves. The claymores perform well against the onslaught of awakened beings, forcing Ricardo to enter the fray to thwart any more casualties. Displaying his power, he dispatches Veronica and Undyne with ease. Meanwhile, Raki discovers Priscilla in a cave eating the guts of a man. Raki screams for Priscilla to stop. Jean gets impaled through her stomach soon after Undyne's death. Claire attacks Ricardo in rage, leaving Flora without protection. Flora gets vertically cut in half from her forehead. His next aim is Miria, the remaining captain and strongest of the claymores assembled. Helen, Claire, and Deneuve try everything to prevent Ricardo from eradicating Miria. They're easily overpowered. The fight continues and Deneuve gets maimed by Ricardo. Back in the woods, Raki decides to leave Priscilla and Eiley after hearing that Claire is in Pieta. Miria struggles against Ricardo, and in the end, even she is outmatched by his speed and agility. In fact, she overused her phantom after image just to keep up with him. As she is about to get slain, Claire manages to cut off Ricardo's arm without her realizing it. Ricardo, excited at the prospect of a worthy opponent since Eiley had thrashed, begins to take the fight seriously and enjoy it. Raki arrives and witnesses the partially awakened Claire, determined to avenge Jean's ostensible death. Claire releases dangerous amounts of energy and eventually slashes Ricardo into pieces as Jean regains consciousness. Unable to return to her normal state, Claire requests from Helen to decapitate her so she will not awaken. Meanwhile, Priscilla recognizes Claire's energy and believing her to be Teresa. As her memories return, Claire detects Priscilla's presence, so she surges towards Priscilla. Intrigued by the situation, Eiley orders his forces to remain at the sidelines as he observes the situation. In response to the situation, the organization dispatches Galadia, the eyes of the organization, to examine the conflict in the north. The fight between Claire and Priscilla venues within a volcano while Eiley observes the battle. Priscilla, who does not realize that she's an awakened being, easily repels Claire, who she believes to be Teresa. Meanwhile, Jean and Raki travel towards the battleground. As Claire is about to get killed by Priscilla, Miria, Helen, and Deneuve save her. They manage to reach a catbird seat, but Priscilla fully releases her power, as she had not fully awakened at that point. She effortlessly defeats the 3 claymores. Determined to avenge Teresa, Claire fully releases her energy in an effort to defeat her. Claire, nearly fully awakened, and continues the battle despite Priscilla still dominates the fight with apparent ease. When Claire harnesses enough mental power and repeats to herself the whole purpose of her struggle, she experiences flashbacks of Teresa. Awakened Claire strikes her with multiple devastating attacks. Priscilla reverts to her human form and is about to be killed when Raki intervenes, but Claire, unable to control herself, attacks him as well. Jean takes the blow instead and, although fatally wounded, manages to have Claire revert to her human form to pay back for what Claire had done for her. This leaves Claire tormented with grief for the death of her comrade. Priscilla is then retrieved by Eiley. And last scenes, Miria, Helen, Deneuve, and Claire announce their wish to leave the organization and depart on separate journeys, with Helen traveling with Deneuve and Raki with Claire. That's all, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe for more.